The subtle edge of danger and bespoke sandalwood always seemed to arrive before Jin-woo Choi did. Outside, the sub-zero chill of the stratosphere battered the Boeing 777's fuselage, carrying with it the absolute isolation of flying 40,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. Inside the transglobal first-class cabin, however, a manufactured serenity radiated from every corner. Soft amber mood lighting cast a warm glow across cream leather seats and polished mahogany armrests. The hushed, steady hum of the jet engines mixed with the delicate clink of fine crystal and the murmur of guarded conversations. Nia Washington moved down the aisle with practiced invisibility. Her tailored navy uniform was impeccably crisp, a patterned silk scarf tied neatly at her collar, her dark hair pulled back into a flawless bun. At 26, she had mastered the art of being entirely present without ever being seen. It was a survival skill essential for anyone working in a flying fortress where the world's ultra-elite came to make deals far above the reach of international law. She refilled reserve Bordeaux, removed porcelain plates, and kept her eyes carefully lowered, though she never missed a detail. The tech billionaire in 2A tapping a nervous rhythm. The disgraced diplomat in 4F drinking his scotch a little too fast. The heavy shudder of the Boeing 777's landing gear deploying did nothing to break the suffocating tension in the first-class cabin. Ever since Nia had leaned over seat 3A, pointed a manicured finger directly into Jin-woo Choi's face, and delivered 3 razor-sharp words in perfect, unaccented Korean, "You're the dog," the air had turned to ice. For the remainder of the flight, Jin-woo hadn't spoken. He had simply watched her, his dark eyes tracking her every movement with the cold, calculating precision of a predator, realizing its prey had teeth. When the plane finally connected to the jet bridge at O'Hare, Nia moved with desperate efficiency. She needed to grab her rollerboard, swap her silk scarf for a heavy winter coat, and disappear into the anonymity of the sprawling international terminal. Her father had taught her that survival meant knowing when to vanish. She had broken the cardinal rule tonight. She had let her pride speak louder than her preservation. But the syndicate did not wait for the seatbelt sign to turn off. As Nia stepped into the narrow galley to gather her things, a shadow fell over the threshold. 2 men in immaculate charcoal suits blocked the exit. They were built like vault doors, their expressions blank, their hands resting too naturally near the lapels of their jackets. Behind them stood Jin-woo. Stripped of the dim ambient lighting of the cabin, the harsh fluorescent glare of the galley caught the sharp angles of his jaw and the expensive, meticulous cut of his midnight blue suit. "Miss Washington," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that sent a frantic spike of adrenaline straight through her chest. He spoke in English this time, the accent faint but distinctly aristocratic. "You won't be taking the crew shuttle tonight." Nia lifted her chin, forcing her breathing to remain steady. "My shift is over, Mr. Choi. If you have a complaint regarding my service, you can direct it to Transglobal Management." A ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't about the service." He stepped closer, invading her space, the faint scent of sandalwood and something sharper wrapping around her. He switched effortlessly back to the language she had used to humiliate him. Where did a flight attendant from America learn to speak the dialect of the southern syndicates? She stared back, refusing to shrink away. "I have a talent for languages," she replied in the same flawless territorial cadence. Jin-woo's gaze dropped to her hands, noting the white-knuckled grip she had on her luggage handle, then back up to her defiant eyes. He wasn't buying it. A dialect that specific wasn't taught in university classrooms. It was inherited in blood and cigarette smoke in the back rooms of Busan. He gestured sharply to his men. "Bring her. We have a long layover." Before Nia could reach for the emergency intercom, a heavy hand clamped over her arm, pulling her out of the aircraft and into a world she had spent her entire life trying to outrun. The sterile corridors of O'Hare's private aviation terminal blurred past as the 2 massive suits escorted Nia away from the bustling public concourse. They bypassed customs entirely, a stark reminder of the invisible privileges afforded to men like Jin-woo Choi. They ushered her into an ultra-exclusive VIP lounge, its heavy, frosted glass doors sealing shut behind them with a definitive, locking click. The room was a study in minimalist luxury: dark mahogany, low-slung leather couches, and panoramic windows overlooking the rain-slicked tarmac. But to Nia, it was just a very expensive cage. Jin-woo moved toward a sleek bar cart in the corner, his demeanor infuriatingly calm. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, the crystal clinking sharply in the absolute silence of the room. When he turned back, he held one out to her. Nia didn't move. She kept her posture rigid, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Detaining a federal aviation employee on U.S. soil is a bold move, even for a syndicate heir. Jin-woo's eyes flashed with a dangerous kind of amusement. He set the untasted glass down on a low table and slowly began to circle her, evaluating her like a complex, volatile puzzle. "I haven't detained anyone," he murmured, his voice dropping to a smooth, predatory tenor. "We are simply having a layover conversation, one where you explain how a trans-global flight attendant learned to speak with the exact inflection of the Busan underworld." "I told you," Nia said, her pulse hammering against her ribs, but her voice steady. "I have a talent for languages." "A talent for French, perhaps, or Mandarin," Jin-woo countered, stepping close enough that the sharp, expensive scent of sandalwood wrapped around her again. "But the dialect you use to insult me, the specific slang, the cadence, that isn't taught in a university. That is spoken in backroom gambling parlors by men who handle illegal cargo and enforce blood debts. It is a language of ghosts and criminals. Who taught you?" Nia forced herself to meet his dark, scrutinizing gaze without flinching. Her father's face flashed in her mind, the quiet, exhausted cargo pilot who had whispered to her in that exact dialect, trying to preserve a piece of his heritage before the syndicate swallowed him whole. She took that deep, buried grief and forged it into steel. "My father," she said evenly. Jin-woo paused, his dark eyebrows pulling together. "Your father? A Black American man who spoke native Busan Korean?" "My father flew cargo routes overseas," Nia said, eloquently, giving him the rehearsed half-truth she used to protect herself. "He picked it up, he taught me." "And where is this gifted pilot now?" "He's dead," she stated, the cold finality in her voice entirely genuine. Jin-woo stopped circling. For a fraction of a second, the aristocratic mask slipped, revealing a flicker of intense, calculating curiosity. He leaned in, the air between them crackling with an electric, undeniable tension. "You are telling the truth about his death, Miss Washington, but you are lying about who he was." He smiled, a cold and fascinated expression. "And I am not going to let you fly anywhere until I find out why his ghost is haunting my airspace." The silence in the VIP lounge stretched, heavy and suffocating against the backdrop of the relentless Chicago rain. Jin-woo finally turned away from the panoramic windows, shedding his tailored suit jacket with a slow, heavy exhale. As the fabric slipped from his shoulders, the crisp white of his dress shirt pulled taut, revealing the faint, jagged outline of a brutal scar trailing up the side of his neck, a violent, imperfect disruption to his otherwise flawless exterior. Nia's eyes caught the marred skin. It was a sudden, jarring reminder that the untouchable syndicate heir bled just like anyone else. He poured another measure of amber whiskey, downing it in one smooth, practiced motion. "A Black American cargo pilot," he mused, the aristocratic edge of his voice softening into something that sounded dangerously like exhaustion. "Who spoke the Busan dialect with the exact, unforgiving cadence of the dockworkers, who flew international routes and died under sudden circumstances. Nia swallowed hard, her nails biting into her palms to keep her hands from trembling. I told you he... Transglobal didn't employ him, Jin-woo interrupted softly, turning back to face her. At least, not exclusively. A man with that specific linguistic skill set moving undocumented cargo across international borders without asking questions. He flew for Kang Aviation. The name hit Nia like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Kang. It was the name her father had whispered in his final feverish days in a sterile hospital room. The shadow corporation that had ordered his plane to be grounded permanently. Chairman Kang, Jin-woo continued, his dark eyes locked onto hers, tracking the terrifying recognition that was currently shattering her stoic mask. My uncle. Nia took a sharp step back, the flight attendant persona evaporating entirely. Your family killed him. My uncle killed him, Jin-woo corrected, his voice suddenly laced with a venomous, raw bitterness. He closed the distance between them, not as a predator this time, but as a man bearing the crushing weight of a rotting empire. My uncle murders anyone who threatens his illicit smuggling routes. I have spent 3 years trying to dismantle his faction from the inside, navigating a war in my own house, gathering every piece of leverage I can find to burn his operation to the ground. He stopped mere inches from her. The cold, arrogant mafia boss from the first-class cabin was gone, replaced by someone deeply haunted. He looked down at her, the scent of sandalwood mixing with the sharp tang of his whiskey. Your father wasn't just a pilot, Nia, he said quietly, the sound of her first name on his lips feeling strangely intimate in the vast, empty lounge. He was a ghost who walked away with my uncle's most sensitive flight logs I need to end this. Nia stared up at him, her heart hammering wildly as the terrifying reality set in. They weren't just predator and prey. They were 2 people drowning in the exact same wake of betrayal. The rain lashed violently against the tinted windows of Jin-woo's armored SUV as it crept toward the forgotten edge of O'Hare's industrial aviation sector. Nia sat in the passenger seat, the heavy silence between them punctuated only by the rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers. She had directed him to a decaying, corrugated metal hangar, a relic from an era before corporate megacarriers swallowed the airways. It smelled of rusted iron, damp concrete, and the sharp, nostalgic sting of aviation fuel. Her father had kept a private locker here, a secret he had guarded with his life. Jin-woo killed the engine, the sudden quiet heavy with unspoken tension. He followed her inside, his presence a dark, imposing anchor in the drafty cavern of the hangar. Nia moved purposefully toward a battered steel cabinet tucked behind a stack of wooden freight pallets. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled a small brass key from a chain hidden beneath her collar. The lock gave way with a harsh, grating scrape. Inside, sitting atop a faded leather flight jacket, was a thick, leather-bound logbook. Jin-woo stepped close behind her, the warmth radiating from his body a stark contrast to the freezing draft of the room. When Nia opened the book, the yellowed pages revealed meticulous handwritten columns. But it wasn't standard cargo weights or fuel expenditures. It was a terrifyingly detailed ledger written in coded Busan slang. Dates, coordinates, offshore shell accounts, and the chilling inventory of illegal arms moving through commercial flight routes under the guise of humanitarian aid. He didn't just walk away, Nia whispered, her voice cracking as her finger traced her father's frantic final entries. He refused to fly the shipment to a conflict zone. He grounded the plane. And my uncle grounded him permanently, Jin-woo finished, his voice a hollow, venomous rasp. He stared over her shoulder at the pages, the full weight of Chairman Kang's betrayal crashing down on him. The empire Jin-woo was meant to inherit wasn't just built on standard syndicate vice, it was built on the blood of innocent people and the sacrifice of an honest pilot who had tried to say no.
Jin-woo's jaw tightened, his aristocratic composure shattering under the weight of his family's rotting legacy. Nia looked up from the ledger, turning slightly to face him. She expected to see the cold calculation of a Mafia heir plotting his next move. Instead, she saw profound, devastating grief. The untouchable boss she had insulted at 30,000 feet was a captive of his own bloodline, desperate to burn it down. The protective wall she had built around her heart for years finally began to fracture. They were both orphans of Kang's ruthless ambition. She closed the ledger, the sound echoing sharply in the empty hangar, and held it firmly between them. "We don't run from this," she said, her eyes locking onto his with newfound steel. "We use it."
Jin-woo stared at the woman standing before him in the dim, freezing hangar. Hours ago, she'd been a nameless flight attendant who humiliated him at 30,000 feet. Now she held the instrument of his family's destruction and his own salvation. His hands moved slowly, covering hers where they gripped the weathered leather of the logbook. His skin was warm, grounding her trembling fingers. "He killed your father," Jin-woo said, his voice stripped of its aristocratic arrogance, leaving only a raw, bleeding honesty. The rain pounded relentlessly against the corrugated steel roof, filling the heavy silence. "By the rules of the syndicate, Nia, you should be putting a bullet in my chest right now. Blood demands blood." Nia didn't pull away. She looked up into his dark, haunted eyes, then at the jagged scar rising above his collar. She saw the violence he had endured, the very violence he was desperately trying to dismantle. "My father didn't ground that plane so I could become a killer," she replied, her voice steadying as the truth crystallized between them. "He grounded it to break the cycle. If I shoot you, Chairman Kang wins. The arms keep flying. The rot just spreads to the next generation." Jin-woo's breath hitched slightly. For his entire life, he had been defined by the sins of his bloodline, viewed by his enemies as merely an extension of his uncle's cruelty. But Nia saw through the tailored suits and the fearsome reputation. She saw the man underneath, fighting a solitary war from within a gilded cage. "I have spent 3 years looking for a weakness in his armor," Jin-woo murmured, closing the fractional distance between them. The biting draft of the hangar vanished in the magnetic pull of their shared proximity. "I thought I had to burn it all down alone. I thought trust was a luxury I couldn't afford." "You aren't alone anymore," Nia said softly. She deliberately released her grip on the logbook, sliding the heavy ledger directly into the inner pocket of his coat. As she did, her palm rested briefly against his chest. Beneath the expensive fabric, she could feel the rapid, steady cadence of his heart. It was the pulse of a man choosing right over easy. Jin-woo's hand came up to gently trace the line of her jaw, a fleeting electric touch that defied every rule they had both lived by. The ghost of her father's grief and the weight of his family's corruption seemed to recede, replaced by a fierce, undeniable loyalty. "Then we tear him down together," Jin-woo vowed, the shadows in his eyes giving way to a brilliant, terrifying clarity. "We use this ledger to choke his supply lines. We expose every ghost flight." Nia nodded, her practiced invisibility completely abandoned. They were no longer predator and prey. They were a unified front, standing in the wreckage of their pasts, ready to light the match. The fragile quiet of their newly forged alliance shattered before they could even turn toward the exit. Over the relentless drumming of the rain, the distinct, high-pitched squeal of heavy tires skidding on wet asphalt echoed outside. Brilliant, blinding halogen headlights suddenly flooded the gaps in the corrugated steel walls, casting long, monstrous shadows across the hangar floor. Chairman Kang had not waited for his nephew to make the first move. "Get down!" Jin-woo roared, his aristocratic calm vanishing into pure, lethal instinct. He shoved Nia behind the rusted bulk of a forgotten forklift just as the hangar's side door was kicked violently off its hinges.
The dull, rapid pop of suppressed gunfire immediately filled the cavernous space. Sparks rained down as bullets tore through the metal cabinet where her father's logbook had been hidden seconds prior. Jin-woo drew a sleek, matte black sidearm from beneath his tailored coat, returning fire with terrifying precision to buy them a fraction of a second. "He tracked my vehicle," Jin-woo shouted over the deafening ricochets, his body angled to shield hers from the crossfire. "There are too many to hold off. We need an exit." Nia didn't panic. The same logistical overdrive that allowed her to manage mid-air emergencies at 30,000 feet snapped into focus. She knew the anatomy of these forgotten aviation sectors better than any syndicate hitman. "The old maintenance utility corridor," she yelled, pointing toward a heavy, unmarked iron door at the rear of the structure. "It connects directly to the active commercial tarmac. They won't expect us to run toward the open runways." Jin-woo didn't hesitate. "Move, I'll cover you." He stepped out of cover and laid down a suppressing volley, the sharp cracks of his weapon momentarily pinning Kang's assassins behind the freight pallets. Nia sprinted, her boots slipping on the oil-stained concrete, and hauled the heavy iron door open just as a bullet sparked against the frame, inches from her shoulder. Jin-woo slid through the gap right behind her, slamming the door shut and throwing the heavy deadbolt. They burst out of the subterranean tunnel a minute later, stumbling onto the sprawling, rain-slicked expanse of O'Hare's active commercial tarmac. The freezing downpour instantly soaked through their clothes, and the deafening roar of a massive cargo jet throttling up on a nearby runway swallowed the sounds of their pursuit. They were entirely exposed in a treacherous maze of taxiways, luggage trains, and towering tail fins. But Nia navigated the chaos with practiced ease. She pulled Jin-woo into the deep shadows of a massive refueling tanker, keeping them out of the sightlines of both the perimeter security towers and the killers hunting them in the dark. Jin-woo leaned heavily against the cold metal of the tanker, the precious ledger clutched securely inside his coat. He looked at Nia, drenched, breathless, but entirely unbroken. They had survived Kang's opening salvo, but the illusion of safety was gone. They were officially on the run.
Hours later, the adrenaline finally began to recede, leaving behind the bone-deep chill of their narrow escape. Barricaded inside a sterile, anonymous safe house on the outskirts of the city, the relentless rain beat against the heavily curtained windows. Jin-woo paced the length of the cramped living room, a predator caged by circumstance. He had stripped off his ruined suit jacket, his jaw clenched as he calculated how many loyal men he had left for a frontal assault on his uncle's compound. The instinct for blood and retribution radiated from him, a dark legacy he was struggling to suppress. "No," Nia said firmly, cutting through his violent calculus. She stood at the small kitchenette counter, the ancient overhead light casting harsh shadows over the leather-bound logbook spread open before her. She had traded her soaked uniform for a dry, oversized sweater found in the bedroom, replacing her flight attendant persona with cold, hard strategy. If you go in with guns, you're playing his game. You become just another violent syndicate heir bleeding out on the concrete. Jin-woo stopped pacing, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The tension in the room was palpable, a clash between the world he was raised in and the one she was trying to build. "Then how do we end him? He won't stop hunting us." "We hijack his logistics," Nia said, her voice dropping into the calm, authoritative register she used to manage mid-air crises. She traced a finger down her father's meticulously coded columns. "I know international customs loopholes. I know exactly how Oceanic Air and Transglobal route their ghost flights to avoid radar detection. Kang's biggest undocumented arms shipment is arriving tomorrow night." Jin-woo moved closer, drawn by the brilliant, terrifying intellect of the woman who had shamed him at 30,000 feet. He leaned over the counter, their shoulders brushing. "At the private airstrip in Gary," he murmured, reading the coordinates she pointed to.
Exactly, Nia nodded, her eyes fierce. We don't shoot him. We trigger an automatic multi-agency aviation lockdown. I can cross-reference these logs with the FAA's encrypted database and build an undeniable paper trail. We leak this ledger to Homeland Security, Interpol, and we international press at the exact second his planes touch the tarmac. Jin-woo stared at her, utterly captivated. She wasn't just surviving, she was orchestrating a bloodless decapitation of one of the most ruthless criminal empires in the world. The uncle who had ruled through fear was about to be undone by a woman armed with routing numbers and scheduling manifests. He won't even see it coming, Jin-woo said softly, his hand covering hers on the open ledger. The shadows in his eyes finally gave way to a profound, unwavering respect. He saw a partner, an equal. Let's ground him for good.
The following evening, the blinding halogen floodlights of the private Gary airstrip cut through the thick, rolling fog like executioner's blades. Chairman Kang stood proudly on the damp tarmac, the collar of his expensive cashmere coat turned up against the chill. The heavy roar of unauthorized cargo jets throttling down filled the air, the massive aircraft taxiing toward the rusted corrugated hangars. He stood amidst a dozen heavily armed syndicate enforcers, a king surveying his untouchable empire. He didn't notice Jin-woo and Nia stepping out from the deep shadows of a decommissioned fuel depot until it was entirely too late. The metallic clatter of weapons being raised echoed across the wet concrete as Kang's men spotted the intruders. Jin-woo stepped forward, placing himself slightly ahead of Nia, though his hands remained empty and held loosely at his sides. Chairman Kang raised a hand, halting his men with a smug, rotting smile. "Nephew," he sneered, his voice carrying easily over the dying whine of the jet engines. "And you brought the pilot's daughter. How poetically foolish. I grounded her father for getting in my way, and now I will do exactly the same to you." Nia didn't flinch at the mention of her father's murder. The flight attendant who had spent her life hiding was gone, replaced by a woman forged in the fires of her own reclaimed legacy. She stepped out from behind Jin-woo's protective stance, bridging the distance until she was mere yards from the syndicate boss. She raised her hand, extending a single manicured finger, exactly as she had in the first-class cabin. "Look at your phone, old man," she commanded, her flawless Busan accent slicing through the freezing Indiana fog. Kang's smile faltered. Before he could issue a lethal order, a chorus of frantic synchronized vibrations erupted from the pockets of his enforcers. Kang's own encrypted device lit up violently with a dozen emergency security breaches. "Your airspace is permanently closed," Nia said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "Your offshore shell accounts are frozen. The FAA has locked your transponders, and the international press currently possesses 17 years of your ghost flight manifests." The distant, mournful wail of sirens suddenly pierced the heavy night air. Within seconds, the sound multiplied into a deafening roar. Red and blue lights breached the fog from every access road, flooding the tarmac with the undeniable reality of federal authority. Kang's empire crumbled in an instant, without a single shot fired. His men dropped their weapons onto the wet asphalt, raising their hands in surrender as armored tactical vehicles breached the perimeter. Federal agents swarmed the airstrip, forcing the once fearsome syndicate chairman to his knees in the freezing rain. Jin-woo stood beside Nia, his hand finding hers in the dark. Their fingers intertwined tightly as they watched the poison of his family's legacy get ripped out by the roots, finally breaking the cycle of blood. 6 months later, the relentless, suffocating pressure of survival had finally lifted, replaced by the smooth, steady hum of a Gulfstream G650 cruising at 40,000 feet. Nia sat by the window, but she wasn't wearing a tailored Navy uniform, and she certainly wasn't keeping her eyes lowered. She looked out at the endless, sunlit horizon, no longer viewing the sky as a place to hide, but as a vast expanse she finally owned a piece of. The federal indictments had completely decimated Chairman Kang's illicit network. The aftermath of the hangar showdown was a brutal, exhaustive legal war, but Jin-woo had ruthlessly purged the syndicate's rot from the inside out. In its place stood Choi Logistics, a transparent, fully legitimate global aviation firm. Together, they had repurposed the seized offshore funds from the ghost flights, establishing a massive international scholarship program for underprivileged youth dreaming of the skies. They had successfully transformed a dark legacy of blood and smuggling into one of elevation and hope. Footsteps sounded softly on the plush cabin carpet. Jin-woo walked down the aisle, completely devoid of the towering, menacing bodyguards that had once shadowed his every move. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, the collar casually open, looking lighter and more at peace than the haunted, aristocratic air she had confronted in a rainy hangar. The faint, familiar scent of bespoke sandalwood preceded him as he handed her a flute of champagne. "The board approved the final endowments for the pilot academy," he said, taking the seat opposite hers. His dark eyes held a profound warmth that was entirely reserved for her. "The first class of cadets starts their flight training next month." Nia accepted the glass, the fine crystal catching the high-altitude sunlight. "My father would have loved that," she smiled, her voice softening. "He just wanted to fly without having to look over his shoulder." "And now his daughter ensures others can do exactly that," Jin-woo murmured. He set his own glass aside and moved closer, kneeling smoothly on the floor of the cabin, entirely indifferent to the slight turbulence. Nia's breath hitched. The imposing, untouchable Mafia boss, who had once commanded fear with a single look, was gazing up at her with complete, unguarded reverence. "You grounded me when I was drowning in my family's sins," Jin-woo said softly, his voice a smooth, emotional tenor. He reached into his pocket and produced a sleek velvet box, flipping it open to reveal a brilliant, flawless diamond. "You showed me that we aren't defined by the blood we inherit, but by the skies we choose to conquer. I don't want to fly another mile without you as my equal, my partner, and my wife." He reached for her free hand, his thumb gently grazing her knuckles. "Marry me, Nia. Let's build the rest of this life together." Tears pricked Nia's eyes, washing away the very last remnants of the invisible flight attendant she used to be. She looked at the man who had helped her rewrite the stars, gently pulling him up to meet her lips. "Yes," she breathed against his mouth, anchoring herself to the only home she would ever need. After a lifetime of running, they were finally, perfectly cleared for takeoff. And there we have it, my beautiful kindred spirits. A story of high-altitude tension, unbreakable courage, and the kind of love that rewrites history and breaks generational curses. Nia and Jin-woo proved that we are never defined by the turbulence of our past, but by the skies we choose to conquer. If Nia's fierce defiance and Jin-woo's ultimate redemption captured your heart today, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Like this video to let me know you enjoyed the ride. Share it with someone who loves a story where the underdog takes the empire. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Nia's shoes at 30,000 feet? Would you have stayed invisible, or would you have pointed that finger and spoken up? Every click, every comment, and every bit of love you give helps our little storytelling family grow across the world and allows us to keep uncovering these unforgettable journeys together. Until next time, stay grounded, aim high, and never let anyone make you invisible.